The research station on Kelvar 7 wasn't supposed to be a war zone. It was a xenobiology outpost, tucked into the northern hemisphere of a planet that smelled like cinnamon and rain. Arya had been there for 3 years studying the Kelvari, a species of furred bipedal beings whose cubs grew slower than any sentient race in the known galaxy. They were gentle, harmless. Their civilization had never developed weapons beyond farming tools. That made them perfect targets. The Sarkith raiders came at dawn, their ships screaming through the atmosphere like metal vultures. Arya was in the nursery when the first explosion shattered the eastern wing. The building shook and she instinctively wrapped her arms around the nearest cub, a tiny thing named Neki, barely up to her waist with silver-tipped fur and eyes too large for his face. "Stay down," Arya whispered. Her voice steady despite the thunder of boots in the corridor. The Kelvari had no concept of violence. The adult researchers froze when the raiders burst through the doors, their weapons humming with lethal energy. Arya didn't freeze. She had grown up on the mining colonies of Epsilon Reach, where survival meant moving before thinking. She pushed Neki behind her and raised her hands. "They're children," she said in Galactic Standard, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Non-combatants, protected under the Accord." The lead raider, a towering Sarketh with scales like obsidian, laughed. It was a wet, clicking sound. "The Accord died with the Council," he said, leveling his weapon at the cluster of cubs huddled in the corner. Arya didn't think. She stepped forward, placing herself between the weapon and the cubs. Her heart hammered, but her feet were planted. She had seen death before. She had buried friends in collapsed tunnels, had watched ships burn in the void, but she had never stood in front of a weapon meant for children. "You'll have to go through me first," she said. The raider's finger twitched on the trigger. The blast was white-hot, a beam of concentrated plasma designed to vaporize bone. Arya saw it coming, saw the raider's sneer, saw the reflection of the energy coil in his weapon. She didn't move. Couldn't move. Not if it meant leaving the cubs exposed. The impact threw her backward, her body a shield of flesh and bone. The pain was instantaneous, a searing, all-consuming agony that turned her vision white. She hit the floor hard, smoke rising from the scorched crater in her chest. Blood pooled beneath her, warm and spreading. The cubs screamed, high-pitched, keening wails that echoed through the shattered nursery. The raider stepped forward, weapon still raised, but something in the room had shifted. The Kelvari adult, so passive moments before, surged forward with a ferocity no one, not even Arya, had known they possessed. They tore at the raiders with claws and teeth, their gentle nature burned away by the sight of a human dying for their young. The Sarkith fled, retreating to their ships under a hail of improvised weapons and raw fury, but the damage was done. Arya lay on the cold floor, her breathing shallow, each gasp a knife in her lungs. The world was dimming, the edges of her vision folding inward like a closing iris. She felt small hands on her face, soft fur brushing her cheek. Neki. The smallest cub knelt beside her, his eyes wide and glistening. He placed one tiny paw on her shoulder, his voice barely a whisper. "Why?" he asked in broken standard. "Why you?" Arya's lips moved, but no sound came. She wanted to tell him that it was instinct, that humans didn't leave the vulnerable behind, that she had made her choice the moment she stepped in front of that weapon. But the words wouldn't come. Neki leaned closer, his whiskers trembling. Around them, the other cubs gathered, their small bodies forming a protective circle. The adult Kelvari stood at the edges, their faces stricken, their hands bloodied. "We remember," Neki murmured, his voice gaining strength. "We remember you." Arya's eyes fluttered closed. The pain was fading now, replaced by a cold numbness that spread from her chest outward. She heard voices, distant, overlapping, some in standard, some in the melodic tones of Kelvari. She felt the weight of small hands on her arms, her legs, her face, and then she heard Neki again, his voice cutting through the fog. "We'll track them all." The words were soft, almost lost beneath the sound of Arya's failing heartbeat, but they carried a promise, a vow spoken by a species that had never known vengeance, never understood hatred, never wielded a weapon in anger, until now. 3 months later, the Galactic Council received reports of Sarketh raider ships disappearing along the outer rim. No wreckage, no survivors, just gone. The few who escaped told stories of silent hunters, small, furred figures who moved through the void with impossible precision. They spoke of ships boarded in the dead of night, crews found with their throats torn out and a single message left behind in every case. Written in standard for Arya, the Kelvari had been uplifted overnight, their grief forging them into something the galaxy had never seen. They didn't build armies or fleets. They didn't declare war or seek alliances. They simply hunted. And at the head of every pack was Neki, the smallest cub, now grown into something fierce and unyielding. He carried a piece of scorched fabric, a scrap of Arya's uniform, tied around his wrist like a talisman. When asked why the Kelvari had changed so suddenly, why they had abandoned their peaceful ways, Neki's response was always the same. She stepped in front of the blast for us. The smallest, the weakest. She didn't hesitate. He would pause, his eyes distant, his claws flexing. So we won't either. The galaxy learned a hard lesson that year. Humans might be fragile, short-lived, and recklessly brave. But the bonds they forge, those are unbreakable. And if you harm something a human has chosen to protect, you don't just make an enemy of humanity. You make an enemy of everyone they ever loved.